Hello, my name is Yunli. In this project, I'm responsible for the technical research and technology test.
Hello, I'm Casper, and I'm animator and a face mask designer in this project.
My name is Yeju, and for this project, I am the graphic designer working on the designing of the mask.
My name is Xuhao. I am a musician, guitarist, vocalist, and composer, and I composed all the music for the Bian Lian project.
So I'm Karen and I'm the project manager. My biggest responsibilities is to work closely with each members. So I'm like essentially the glue to the team. I combine everything together. So I would take Yeju's and Casper's animations and combine it with the sound created from the sound artist and give it to Yunli so that she can put it into Connect.
In this project, I want to show the audience about Bian Lian. Bian Lian is the Chinese art of face changing. It's a part of the traditional Chinese opera. In Bian Lian, face changing is used to show a different emotion and different roles.
Bian Lian is actually like a dying art form. I grew up watching it as a kid and in these like really majestic theaters, and they are usually like a big celebratory performances for festivals. But nowadays people don't only go to see it in like proper form, like we see it on the street as like a street performance, but like the meaning behind it is kind of lost. And Bian Lian is actually a really heavily guarded art form. Like only the masters who are actually performing the arts actually know how it's done. To keep this legacy from dying, we decided to create this as a part of our project. So we want more people to know about this, they understand the meaning behind the mask, the emotions that ties behind it, and just to make cultural learning more fun and interesting.
The inspiration is from a YouTube video called Connected Color Real-Time Face Tracking and 3D Projection Mapping. We thought a various beautiful color was projected on a performer's face. That is very impressive. It reminds us about Bian Lian, because Bian Lian also has various beautiful colors on the masks. So we decided to create a real-time face tracking projection mapping to show face changing, the art of Bian Lian.
The theme that needs to be expressed about my mask is destruction. The destruction means disappearance and brokenness. So I consider the theme color to be black and used a low poly mask to make it show a sense of brokenness. A small part of the mask pattern is retained to express a sense of non-existence and disappearance. At the beginning, I thought it looked very modern and abstract. I think neon lights and laser light effects are used to express its generation process. The final broken effect is also in line with the theme of this mask. Although the prototype of the second mask was designed by Yunli, it mainly expressed the themes of nature and peace. The leaves and the sun are used to express natural elements, and blue is used to represent calmness. Later stage, in order to make it more special and to make it have a unique transformation, I made it into a watercolor texture because we want to express the traditional Chinese ink and a wash effect. But because this mask is a colorful one, we decided to make it into a colorful ink and a wash special effect, which can also be said to be a watercolor.
So from the concept, we all draw on paper of what we would thought the masks would look like. I got like the mask outline from just like the internet. I searched up the PNG to get like the outline of the mask, and then from the concept that I initially drew up, I thought of like anger as the immersion. Started basically moving what I had drawn on paper onto Illustrator by creating shapes using the pen tool. And I noticed that all the masks that were pre-existing like on the internet, when I search on like the traditional Chinese masks, they were very symmetrical, so I guess it wasn't that hard to create the mask because I was creating one side of the mask, like all the assets on the mask, and then I literally just took it and made another copy and then flipped it onto the other side, so it had the very symmetrical mask. Yes, so after creating the mask, the visual, what we did was we made transition animation from one mask to another. So everyone had their mask transition that they wanted, and then I was in charge of making the transition from one mask to another. What we wanted was like watercolor effect kind of, where it just like spreads out to color in the mask, and then one was like a particle effect. So I was doing them. For the transition effect, I used Adobe After Effects and the effects that were in it, and for the particle effect, the effect that I wanted wasn't really possible with the preset that was in After Effects, so I had to search for another option, which I ended up finding RG Trapcode, which is an external trapcode that I could bring into After Effects, but the problem was that it was not free, which was a difficulty, I guess. So I tried my best to do it within the free trial time, which ended up the transition looking pretty good, which I was quite happy with.
Do you have any experience with projection mapping before?
Projection mapping? No.
No, so this is a completely brand new experience.
Yes.
So how did you get started? How do you even know which program to use?
The first thing I did is to find out what technicals that we can use to put in our project. Need to find out the tutorials to see which one has the possibility to achieve our project. And finally, I found Kinect can work with the touch design. Then I start to experiment it.
Since I had a connection with his own artist, it makes sense that I was the one working closely with him. I sent him synopsis, a summary of our project, the idea behind combining the old and the new. So like the old being the traditional Bian Lian art form, and the new being the projection mapping, the face tracking, all that new technology things. And he was able to create this nice balance with the old and new.
In the process of writing this music, I normally started with a core idea that took something from a Chinese musical idiom. So for example, anger took from percussive rhythms I would hear in Chinese opera, and nature sees me just using a slide on my finger to play guitar in a way that emulated like the guqin way of articulation. For most of these, I recorded all the instruments by myself or inputted them via synth plugins. And the rest of the percussion stuff the Chinese percussion stuff came from samples.
The end of the result will be several animated masks projected onto the performer's face to show different emotions. And there will be some interaction on changing face at the end. I think the interaction will make the experience more interesting so as to attract the audience to learn.
I think the biggest thing that we want the audience to take away from this is curiosity, to want to know more about the mask, the meaning behind it. Maybe that would trigger like a little research thing happening where they were able to eventually figure out, oh, it's an art form that is practiced in China and it's dying because of the secrecy. And that would just fit our project theme of trying to make cultural sharing and learning fun and interesting.
In the exhibition, we will have a performer standing in front of a Kinect camera and a projector in a dark room with little lights on. The animated masks will project it onto the performer's face. Connect camera will detect the performer's gestures in order to make face changing to the masks.
The technology behind projection mapping has been around for a while. However, real-time face tracking, it's still relatively new technology. We don't know much about it. There is not a lot of tutorials step-by-step of how to do it. A lot of time it's done by a really professional team with high budget, really good cameras with high-speed sensors, etc. So it's very difficult to find tutorials that fits our project and our equipment that are available to us.
We do have lots of difficulties because of lots of failed. I have done lots of experiments on how to make the Connect camera to work in Touch Designer, but there are always something wrong. One of the reasons I failed is I am not familiar with Touch Designer, even though I have done a lot of tutorials. For example, I tried to use Connect camera to do the real-time recognition and body skeleton detection to execute interactivity in the projection. One of the tutorials that I found has missing files and the others were too old. It makes many years ago and they are not up to date. At the beginning, I was using a Connect version 1, which is not really work Touch Designer and also not work with some of the tutorials. Later, I had Connect version 2. Then I start to learn how to use Connect camera with Touch Designer.
There are 3 challenges for me. Learning special effects of After Effects, and find and download some plugins, and converting some special effects tutorials into materials to use and blend with own elements and themes. And the last one, finding tutorials, plugins, softwares that can bring to life what are we wanting to achieve.
Like I mentioned before, was the limit of resources that I was working with. Effect that I wanted at first on my mask transition, it wasn't really possible with the preset that was in After Effects, which resulted me into looking for other effects that I could download to use on the project. But then I thought it was resolved, but then the RG charcoal ended up being a paid external feature, which I do not have the budget for and also was quite expensive. I think that caused me to change my mask effect as well. Guess that also helped me to get a better effect of the mask emotion in a way.
The biggest feedback that we received from the milestone presentation was the lack of emotions in our project. People didn't really feel any strong emotion coming through, and that was a big concern of ours. So I had to explain the situation to the song artist.
So I composed the music based on 4 mood prompts I was given, and they were in order: pride, destruction, peace, and anger. For each theme, I utilized a style of Chinese music that I thought would be appropriate to the given mood, which gave me 4 very distinct pieces. Pride is a very heroic sounding piece. I tried to make my guitar sound like an erhu or a dizi, like a flute. And if you're familiar with how those instruments are played, you might be able to hear some of the influence in the way I articulate the melody. I used the Shang pentatonic mode, which is the second mode in Chinese music. This mode has a very striking character to it that immediately sets it apart from anything that's typically associated with Western music. Destruction has me utilizing Buddhist chants over a heavy metal groove. So I chose a Buddhist theme because I associated destruction with samsara, or in Chinese is shengsi. which is the cycle of birth, existence, and death. The first Buddhist temple in China is said to have been built in Sichuan province. So given that this is a Sichuan opera project, there's an obvious connection there because the concept of masks in Sichuan opera and even Beijing opera comes from a local folk opera called No, and that's a precursor to the modern Sichuan opera. And in No opera, the masks hold religious significance, and that carried over, and that was what influenced the presence of masks in Sichuan opera today. And so there's an obvious Buddhist influence on that. In the track itself, the guitar in the transition leading up to the section emulates a dungchen, which is a very long horn used in Tibetan religious rituals. And I also took influence from a Chinese band called Bliss Illusion that plays what they call Buddhist melody. Nature sees me using slide guitar to emulate the sound of a guqin, which is it's a 7-string flat zither-like instrument. It was traditionally played by Chinese scholars to cultivate the mind. It wasn't really used to perform for an audience. Furthermore, Chinese history tells of ancient scholars, ancient intellectuals who were dissatisfied with contemporary society, so they retreated to caves up in the mountains or deep in the forests, where they would live in solitude and they would just play the guqin. So there's obviously a very meditative quality to it that is very close to nature. Anger is probably the most Chinese sounding piece of them all. I use some Chinese percussion that a lot of it you would find in these styles of opera, such as the gu, which is a type of small drum that has a very clacky sound when you strike it, as well as the luo, or in English we know it as the gong, but that in Chinese that's the catch-all term for any really kind of cymbal.
I guess when we got the feedback during the halfway point, we decided that to make our project look more better, we decided to make a background for the different masks to be able to show what the emotion of the mask was more efficiently. So for my mask, I wanted to go with like a fiery effect, so my background ended up being like smoke or like a fog coming out from the corner and from below, which I think with the mask looked okay. At the end, I decided to change the effect on my mask transition a bit, because I thought if it was angry, then it needs to show a bit more like anger, that kind of emotion. So I added like a fire swoosh kind of effect onto the mask transition. So it's kind of like the fire gets to come in and burn up the mask, kind of, as the ash and like the smoke fog gets to appear in the background. So that was what I ended up going with.
So I tried to incorporate techniques and sounds of traditional Chinese instruments, including the guqin and the dizi, into my guitar playing. Most of it is guitar. I don't actually own any traditional Chinese instruments. So the approach was to emulate their sound and also more generally recontextualize those traditional musical languages. And that was the approach that took priority, rather than throwing a bunch of traditional musical instruments on and calling it a day. Fortunately, I had a lot of options to work with, because Chinese music encompasses an enormous amount of styles and idioms that span over thousands of years.
The beginning of semester was done pretty much online, remote learning only. So we weren't able to actually see each other and work together in person. There was a bit of a confusion and a bit of a chaotic process in trying to figure out what was realistic in terms of like technologies, who has what, who can do what. Luckily, as the time passed on, we were able to have a few classes in person on campus, and that was when we were able to meet each other. Yunli was able to bring her Kinect, Casper was able to bring his projector to the class, and we were able to like actually see the project coming to life together in person, and we were able to swap equipment around. So I was able to bring the projector to home and test Map Mapper. Yunli was able to create more tests that she can do in class because we have people that she can test with.
So the main challenge during this whole experience was getting the music to fit the moods conveyed by the masks, and to do so in only 20 seconds. I had to keep my ideas concise yet substantially musical, and what would happen was I would write a much longer piece and then pare it down to its absolute 20-second essentials, and that's what ended up on the soundtrack.